And thank you for watching 2016 Salem elections. And joining me today is Sally Cook, who's a candidate for the 7th Ward, Salem City Council. So, Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ken. I'm excited to be here.
So I have to ask, what led you to run for City Council?
Thank you for asking. I still can't believe I'm here. I'm just a mom from the neighborhood, and I'm just someone who's always believed in community. So to really take that and see where it's come to the point of running for City Council, it's been a fun journey. I'm running for City Council because I was tired of coming up with reasons why I shouldn't.
So what kind of experience do you have in your neighborhood, say, and in general city issues?
Well, when my husband and I bought our house in 2008, I first became involved with the neighborhood association when there was this strip of land that was being unused. And I thought, this would be a really nice spot for a community garden. I wish somebody would turn this into a community garden. And it became, instead of, I wish somebody should, why shouldn't I? I have just as much right to do this as anybody else. So I called the city, found out who owned the land, kind of approached different businesses to see if it was something they were interested in undertaking, and at that point also brought in the neighborhood association to see what their thoughts were, and people were very supportive. In fact, everybody thought it was a good idea. Nobody really wanted to spearhead it, though, which is where I came in.
Well, quite often you find that nobody wants to step forward, so then you have to do something.
That's right. And I feel like those are defining moments in your life when you stop expecting everybody else to do the work and you think, well, I can do this work. And it was a very big project to bite off, but it was very manageable in bits and pieces. In the process of, having one daughter to now having two, we've expanded from no garden to 18 original beds to now almost 60. We have about a third of our gardeners that are on some kind of public assistance, and we donate food to the food share, we donate time, we form relationships, we form community, and we add value to the neighborhood.
Well, I kind of like the idea that you went to various people to find out about getting information from businesses in the area, your neighborhood association, and working through those things. Because when you're on the city council, you're going to have to kind of do very similar things, I would imagine, at a different level, but you're still familiar with doing those kinds of things.
It's true. I think that it's easy to look at Salem or even look at neighborhoods as just a map and think, oh, this will be good here, or that'll be a good spot for that. But the map means a different thing when you live there, when it's your neighborhood. And when I first thought about the garden, I have very dear neighbors across the street from me that said, well, it has to look nice. They're gardeners themselves, and their big pet peeve is when people let things go to seed in the off-season, or when they don't keep their bed up in the winter. So I knew if it was going to be a bed that my neighbors would approve of and a bed that would benefit the community, it had to look nice. It had to be partially landscaped in some way. The project doesn't go anywhere unless you have buy-in from people. I think that we've got a lot of puzzles. The city of Salem's in a really interesting time right now. We can go a lot of different ways, but the solutions to our community problems are all within the community. We have such a rich resource here. If we cultivate those resources and if we look to the voices in our community for solutions, I think we can find some pretty interesting answers.
Well, that brings up the first topic I wanted to discuss with you, and that is the Salem Police Facility. And I think the community did come together and say where they wanted it. Now the question is, how big is it going to be? How much is it going to cost? Are we also then going to retrofit the library and City Hall? Mm-hmm. And those are kind of big issues because it'll be probably on the ballot this fall.
Right.
So I'd kind of like to know what your view of the police facility and the retrofitting of City Hall and the library are.
I think retrofitting of the library and City Hall are vital issues. Our library is well loved and well used, and we certainly value the lives of the people that use the library and the people in the city. And we can't in good conscience not update those libraries, not bring them up to code, and not do the same with City Hall, because staff lives are important too. As far as the police station goes, as you know, I'm part of the Citizens Police Review Board and a graduate of the Citizens Police Academy. I support the police here in Salem, and they need a new facility.
It's critical.
It is critical. Also, I understand that as someone who is not a police officer, it can be very tricky for me to then say, well, you need this or you don't need that. Those are decisions that are best left to the police as far as what they need for services and what they don't. But as far as size and budget, you brought up those issues. What a community can support is something that the voters and the people need to decide. So quite often size is tied to price. So if we're looking at whether or not a measure is going to fail or succeed, I don't know if, given the current estimate, if that's something that people in the area will be able to absorb that cost. I know a lot of people are very supportive of Salem Police and they want them to have a new facility, but it needs to be one that people can afford.
Well, Councilman Nanke brought up a kind of an interesting point during the February 29th work session, is that sometimes what they do is they kind of wait till another bond measure drops off and then they can bring that one in. But bonded indebtedness is still an issue when you're talking about infrastructure, and there's other things that need to be built as well.
You're absolutely right. So it still ties up that money, and if there are other critical needs with our infrastructure, with our water, with public utilities and public service, we can't use those funds because they're tied up. And also I feel like within the city, when I've been canvassing, there's sort of a bit of, people are dissatisfied that they're paying taxes and they don't see the benefits. The things that they see are their parks, their libraries, their sidewalks, their roads, and right now those things are not necessarily the best in different parts of my ward. And when people talk about upgrading them or people talk about adding them, they're told, oh, it's too expensive, there's no money for it. But at the same time, these critical services are where the money goes. And it's right, they're critical, but I don't think people understand that just by having one bond drop off and another one come on, it doesn't mean that we're not feeling that same pinch. You know, all of our city staff, all of our services need funding. We have to find a way to fund the services that we need. And it's important that we come together as a community and have that discussion, especially with the PERS decision that's coming down. People talk about how budgets are going to be in a really tight spot because the funds won't be there. And we haven't had the conversation as a community yet about what kind of services we want to have and what services we're willing to cut.
And I guess the other infrastructure issue, and it was brought up more during, say, the 2014 election, was the third bridge. And there's spending about $60,000 a month on consulting fees to try to keep that thing alive, when the two bridges that we do have need to be retrofitted as well. And basically the state of Oregon has put that on a calendar for about 30 years out. So to me it seems like, this is my view of it, it seems like the city needs to help move that up with the state, plus maybe not spend so much of their extra money on consultants on a third bridge, when what we need is the two bridges we have secure.
Well, we have to use all the tools available. And so I'm not willing to say that, consultants are always a bad idea, but I find it humorous that both with the police station and with the bridge, outside consultants were brought in. And from the get-go, the moms in our Playdate group, we had all said that the DeLon Honda site would be perfect for a new police station when they first started talking about new ideas, because it's something we drive past every day. It's what my friend likes to call a dead zone. We have these dead zones in town, places where businesses have moved and left kind of a vacuum, and wouldn't it be nice to have something in those areas? But we never really get to that part of the conversation, because if you want to talk about change or if you want to talk about a different idea, it's very easy for you to feel like an outsider, like you're against something, when in reality I think most people are for Salem. They just want the right solution and they want to be heard at the table. I mean,
Well, that is a good point, because I think a lot of times people feel very uncomfortable about testifying in front of city council. And it was kind of interesting when the city council brought the subject up, they let people just talk, and there was none of the interaction between city council members and the mayor and the people testifying about the site that they wanted and so on. And I thought that was a good way of maybe going forward, is to have less of that interaction, and sometimes it's almost like a grilling of people getting up there speaking. You know, and it's not easy for a lot of folks to get up and speak in public, and to make it more difficult, I don't think is helpful.
well, I think that it's interesting because as this election year is showing us, everyone deserves a seat at the table, and we need to have strong voices at the table that speak out for everybody. And right now, when people go to testify, it's not just that they see that there's no one speaking for them. I feel like they also feel like they're not being heard. One of the highest forms of respect in any culture is to listen to somebody. And if we listen to the people in those communities, the people who those changes affect, we'll have a different outcome. You know, if this bridge was going through a different area of town, I don't think we'd be having the same discussion that we're having right now. But the fact of the matter is whether or not it's people that I know in West Salem, we have lots of friends that live on the other side of the bridge. We understand the issues of transit. We understand the issue of, you know, rush hour and how horrible the traffic situation can be. We want a solution to that. Is this the best one? Who says it's the best one? Who's benefiting? And at what cost? To me, to the people in Salem, and the people in the Highland neighborhood? That's a neighborhood my husband and I used to live in. And so the thought of displacing people who may have not a lot of options to go, it's something that hits home to me.
Well, you know, that brings up another subject that I wanted to talk about, and that's affordable housing and the homeless situation. I mean, there's been several kind of groups get together to talk about the homeless situation, and to me, it is something that really, we've talked enough. It's time for some action. And I know that there's over 6,000, there's like a 6,000 unit deficit here in Salem as far as affordable housing is concerned. So how would you see how we can improve those numbers and maybe do something about the homeless? Or what is your vision of what we can do?
Well, it's interesting because you need to have buy-in from everybody. You know, I can talk about my ideas, but I don't have money to build affordable housing for somebody. I can maybe put up a couple people in a guest bedroom, and maybe, you know, I have a garage and a shed, you know, that's about it. But I'm not going to be building whatever housing solution we may need. So people from whatever political walks of life that they are, we need to be able to come together on this issue because it's important and it affects everybody. It affects the people that live here, whether or not they have homes. Some of the solutions that I think we need to look at first is the true cost of housing. And this is something that's largely been ignored. If you do the poverty simulations that Coactive Connection puts on, you can see transportation plays a huge role in housing. The way that we can design communities and the cost of transportation as it affects the cost of housing, it's huge. So we could do something as simple as change the parking requirements for apartments so that instead of having to do 2 apartment parking spaces, maybe you have 1 or 1.5, and maybe offer that that investor, that developer, if they give all of the residents bus passes, or they build in bike storage, or they have a zip car on site for their residents to be able to use, or if they build close to the transit center to be able to have investments, that helps lower the cost for people that live there because they can put their money towards rent instead of rent and a car to be able to get the job, and they're not able to pay for the other things. I mean, Homelessness is a downstream issue, and it is sometimes as simple like what they've done in Utah is doing housing first. You know, getting someone into housing first eliminates the problem of homelessness. But for a community like Salem, we may not have the buy-in to do that. However unfortunate that may be, we need to have everybody at the table. So in talking about incentives, in talking about eliminating the causes of homelessness, I mean, when we talk about children in Salem Kaiser and their families that are housing insecure, it's more than just people living by the bridge. It's more than just people living in their cars or living with mom and dad. There's all different kinds of reasons that people become homeless. Mental health, bad luck, health requirements in the beginning. You know, if you're ill and you can't work and you lose your job and your disability doesn't kick in or you don't know to file, there's all kinds of reasons. And we can address those systematically by strengthening that safety net and by giving people the tools that they need to be self-sufficient, right? But as far as a one-size-fits-all, it's really difficult in especially a place like Salem where there's so many different types of people and different types of opinions. We really need that community buy-in. So,
you know, one of the interesting things you said in there too was about transportation. And recently we had a measure voted down to expand bus service to evenings and weekends here in Salem.
that's correct.
Which I think is, you know, something that needs to be addressed. And you know, when you're talking about housing and having people have access to transit, it has to be every day, because not everybody works Monday through Friday. And they go shopping on the weekends. And not having a car cuts down on their expenses so that they can have money for food and other things that they need as well. So what can you see about maybe doing some bus expansion? I know it's not exactly a city issue. They like to say that it's, you know, chariots, but the city does have to do something, I think.
Well, the city could serve as a supportive role, but again, we have to have that conversation. If we have services, we have to be able to pay for them. If it's a service we can agree that we want, then let's agree that we'll pay for it and let's support it, because it's true, residents need it. Not everybody can drive. Not everybody should own a car. If I make $500 a month, I have no business owning a $200 car that I spend $400 a month trying to upkeep.
Keep it running.
Exactly. I've been given rides home when I've closed the store with cars that are pretty you can see the floor coming underneath.
Well, there is that, but it's also a situation where if you have a good transportation system, then there's fewer cars on the road for the people that are driving.
That's hard for people to see.
Yeah, it is.
So it's interesting because what I try and do, and I try and do this with the garden when I work with people, you have a value and your values have a value. So if you drive your car and you want to drive your car and you picture the automotive commercials from the 60s when you're driving, you know, see the USA in your Chevrolet, you love that feeling of the car, I don't have any business taking you out of it necessarily. And the argument that you're going to bike to work or bike to the store, it may not resonate with you. Now, there are other people that it does resonate with. So my job would be to meet you where you're at, Ken, and say, yes, it is nice for you to not have a traffic jam. And the best way for you to not have a traffic jam is to give people options to be able to cross the street without needing a car to do so. So they shouldn't have to cross, 8 lanes of traffic, 5 lanes of traffic going 40 miles an hour. Give people options for biking and making the biking so that it doesn't interfere with driving. Bike paths are something that a lot of other communities have embraced. All of these situations that we have in Salem, other communities have managed to rise to meet those challenges. They've had budget issues, they've had growth issues, and they've managed to grow in a sustainable way and to meet those challenges in a way that doesn't alienate business and that is attractive to millennials and to retirees that are living there.
Well, yeah, because I look at the fact that I don't want to be driving past my skill level. And as you get older, that becomes an issue because your reaction times slow down. I can tell that I've slowed down over the years, and I can remember my cousin who kept on hiding the keys from his mom so she wouldn't be driving because he was afraid of it. You know, that she had early Alzheimer's, and he was just worried about her driving. And I mean, I was looking at it too when I moved here to Salem, is that they do have a downtown. They do have a place where I can shop by walking. I don't have to drive my car.
It's important that you have options because when people are older and even when they're younger, you can have mobility issues. You know, I have memories of riding my bike down to the store, you know, riding my bike, playing games with the neighbors, riding my bike to school. It's really critical that kids are still able to do that. And when we build a community so that you're cut off unless you have a car, it is not a nice community make because then kids wait until they get their driver's license. There can be trouble as far as, you know, extra time, nowhere to go, no sense of community. So what I'm talking about with the election and what I'm talking about here is really building that community, starting by listening, finding out what people need. And, you know, most people, however much they love to drive their car, when you start talking about, that's great, but wouldn't it be nice if your neighbor who likes to ride his bike wouldn't get killed by going down the street?
Well,
most people are agreeable to that. But it's hard because it's so polarizing. When you talk about biking and bike lanes, people think, well, am I supposed to just ride on this road with all these potholes? Is it going to be at my expense? And really the way things are rigged right now, it's set up so that everything's competing with each other. And that's why this dialogue is so important within the city, where we can say, we want to fund these things. These are critical services. They cannot be cut, and we understand that it needs money to fund them. And we're going to make that commitment to fund them.
And one of the, and you kind of touched on it there, is pedestrian and bike and skateboard safety.
Absolutely.
And I see a lot of that where I live, which is kind of midtown, but quite often I hear the screeching of brakes from cars that, you know, are...
The single most terrifying place for me as a parent of young kids was a parking lot. It always is. In fact, still now I'm a little bit over vigilant in the parking lot because people don't pay attention. They're on their cell phones. Even though we have laws in place, it's extremely difficult to enforce. And there's that personal responsibility. You are obligated to be a safe driver when you operate a car. And the law states that you need to drive at a safe speed given the surroundings. So if you have limited sight distance, if it's dark, you should be driving slower theoretically.
Or if it's a residential area where there's a lot of people walking or biking or skateboarding, you need to be aware of that.
Quite frequently, and this happened when they did the construction on Skyline, our street was one of the detours. So you'll see people, oh, I've got to make up for lost time, or, you know, the speed limit is the minimum suggested speed is what we like to joke. So, you know, neighbors out by the fairgrounds, they've done this, and I've seen it around. They'll put out the little child at play, the little mini green kids with the flags, to kind of remind people, hey, you're driving past someone's home. How would you feel if someone was driving 40 miles an hour past your house? And then to add into the mix, you know, no sidewalks, no shoulder. It's unfortunate because you can see that it's a tragedy, whether or not it's a kid or someone getting the mail or even just an adult that's not paying attention. I mean, nobody wants to hit somebody, and we shouldn't be setting it up so that we shouldn't be designing things so that this is the only option people have, you know?
It was interesting. About a month ago, I saw two moms with strollers crossing 17th, and they had those crossing guard flags in front of them.
Yep.
And they were holding them out. And I thought, boy, it really comes down to that. And I mean, as you as a parent, you're not going to push your kid out in front of traffic unless you know people are going to stop. And it's, to me, I don't see why we don't have more enforcement of the speed limits. I really think that that's part of a problem.
There's 187 police officers for this whole city. That's a lot of city for those guys to be able to cover. And not to mention, not just traffic enforcement, but parking enforcement, and then, complaints and 911 calls. I mean, if you're talking about whether or not people would be able to enforce it, part of having a license and part of being an adult is to recognize I live in the city limits. I'm playing by the rules. I agree not to speed. I understand. But I would argue rather than enforcement, it's that lesson in empathy, which council can lead by example there, because quite frequently with pedestrian deaths, and you can see this in the way that they're reported, well, this person, was or wasn't in a crosswalk. This person had no lighted clothes on. We have a responsibility as pedestrians too, or as cyclists, to be visible. But at what point do you assume that there's responsibility on both ends? Yeah. At what point do you say, this is my job to make sure I know where I'm driving my vehicle and that I'm responsible for what I do?
Well, we've talked a lot about issues that were important to me, and I was just wondering what issues you would like to bring up at this point.
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I really would just encourage everybody to vote in this election. I didn't realize how few people voted until I saw the data. The last election that happened for the city council, only about a fifth of residents that were eligible to vote in Salem did so. And so if you look at council and feel like it doesn't reflect you or the people that you know, it's probably because you and the people you know didn't vote.
Or you can look at it as, well, look, my vote counts for 5 people.
That's true. That's
so
another
you
way
should
to
get
look
out
at
there
it.
and vote, because you're getting to vote for a whole group of people, not just yourself.
It's true. I feel like if parks and the library and livability and sustainability are important to you in Salem, then I would encourage you to vote in the May election. And if you're in my ward, I'd encourage you to vote for me.
Well, and you live in the Ward 5, or Ward 7, and that's in the southwest part of the town. Mm-hmm. So roughly what area are we talking about? And are there any particular issues from that ward that
we have
need
speeding.
attention?
Speeding is a big issue. We have a lot of issues with development that are slated to happen. So as you know, with the housing deficit, there's been a lot of high-density housing growth that's gone in that neighbors have kind of mixed reviews on. It would be nice, I think, to see neighbors at the table more and to see council and the city reach out in a way that would be a design for these high-density houses that would help people to be supportive of them when they go in. If you've lived in an area for 20 years and you're planning on retiring there, to hear next week that there's a 200-unit complex going in across the street that's going to be looking over your backyard or going to be bringing in a lot of traffic, those things can be alarming. And maybe the answer isn't to say yes or no to that development, but how can we make this agreeable to the people that are there? How can we make it more livable? That's what I would say.
Well, Sally, I want to thank you for coming in today and sharing your ideas about the City Council, and good luck in the election.
Well, thank you so much.
And this has been 2016 Salem Elections.